I just have a quick observation to make because this is how the timeline analysis work, and I highly recommend you guys on your own conduct your own timeline analysis for your life, etc. Anything you want to do, if you look at the timeline, and then overlay a factor analysis on the timeline analysis to identify relationships between independent variables or different factors. For example, just going to turn that off to eliminate sound interference. It's pretty cold, I'll turn it back on. This time in Germany, you had what is called the Weimar Period. Now, the Weimar Period was applied eugenics. In this book, Jewish Eugenics, which I highly recommend, by John Glad, he discusses how drugs and pornography reduce the population, specifically the genetically inferior. Drugs could be arguably euthanasia because, of course, overdose deaths. But pornography affects fertility rates, differential fertility, and differential mortality. Drugs and sex. Where else do you remember drugs and sex? (1960s), the what's called the secularist revolution, the anti-church revolution, the drug and sex revolution. Now this is interesting because these two events are related in multiple ways. For example, the drug and sex revolution had a lot of women's liberation, which was really applied eugenics, abortions, and contraceptives. The broken promise of this revolution was that abortions and contraceptives, like condoms in the morning after pill, would eliminate unplanned pregnancies. That's not what happened. With the introduction of condoms in the pill, abortions and STDs increased, not decreased. Very key detail. But what's interesting to me the most right now, because if you look at the downstream consequences of history, Weimar Germany led to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party. The Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party was very violent against pornographers and transgender clinic operators, owners, whatever you want to call them, the Magnus Hirschfeld thing, right? And it strikes me as very curious that Americans in the 1960s did not have the same violent reaction to pornographers and transgenders pushing these agendas in the United States that Germany did in the 1930s. I have this hypothesis that people were actually far more intelligent about many things in the early 1900s than they are in 2023. A good example of that, there's something called Operation Trust. Operation Trust occurred around this time, early 1900s, with what's called the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution. Operation Trust, I believe it was expressed by Lenin, the best way to control the resistance is to lead it ourselves. And so it was a bunch of Bolshevik agents who, posed as military leaders, both ex and current agents of military and Russian government, the monarchy, who were leading the resistance against the Bolsheviks. But in reality, they were the Bolsheviks. And their main job was to spread misinformation and disinformation. Operation Trust. What was this, 2016 to 2020? Yeah. QAnon. So how is it that Americans, with all this access to technology, fell for a Bolshevik strategy from over a century ago that was effective? I mean, there's obviously the saying, those that ignore history are doomed to repeat it, but I think it goes beyond that. I also think there is a lot of weaponized censorship that goes back decades. Right? It's not just the internet. Like the stuff pulled out of this book in the 90s version that you can get of Psychopathia Sexualis. So, on top of that, the Weimar Period to the drug and sex revolution, you have a distinct change in the mindset of the masses to where they think that fighting immorality is bad because that's what the Nazis did, and Germany got its ass kicked for it, for trying to save their children from the pornographers and stuff. Obviously, that wasn't Germany's only motivating factor, but it was a crucial component into people joining the party, as well as the rising unemployment rate. When the rest of the world was in a Great Depression, Hitler's economic miracle, Germany was already in decline economically, and a very bad thing, the inflation rates, etc. Right? Kind of like America now. Weimar America. Hedonism, inflation, drugs and sex, etc. So, every decade, right, between here and here, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s to 2010, 2010 to 2020. Every decade was a more significant sort of roller coaster, cycle edging towards the decline. Moral decline from here to here, affected by what happened here. I find it really interesting that no Americans decided there's clearly no political solution. The government is corrupted by greed, lust, etc. Lust for wealth and power, specifically. The only way to save your kids from drug dealers and pornographers is through violence. The government is not saving your children from these people. The government is helping these people and are these people. So, the skewing of history, the alteration, manipulation, misrepresentation of World War II alone, such a profound psychological transformation of the masses that people embraced what they should have instinctually opposed. And to this day, this actually just strengthened every decade, right? 1970s, Jim Morrison, The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, etc., marijuana, heroin, cocaine, etc., and then the 1980s. And this is also when pornography really was introduced and took root, and the porn industry, started, foundation, 1970s, 1960s. Cocaine for the 1980s and crack. And then a mix of drugs, but marijuana was at the core of every decade of the increase of drug use, STDs, divorce rates, single-parent households, incarceration rates, harder drug use, the gateway drug effect, of course, and so forth and so on. Now, this is a question of morality. fight it, you lose. That's what happened to the Nazis. They tried to stop it. They tried to fight everything that is driving our world into the gutter today, and they lost. Why did they lose? Because morality doesn't win wars. Money does. Not allowing moral and ethical boundaries to stand between you and victory. That's what wins wars. Moral theologians don't win wars. On the other hand, there was the less intelligent who were more manipulated to the thought of, oh no, if I oppose pornography and I oppose, transgender clinics and marijuana and things like that, then I'm a Nazi. I oppose capitalism. I oppose freedom. The Nazis were socialists. We better do what the corporations want because we can always trust the corporations. It's not like Philip Morris or these manufacturers of a Thoride or whatever it was, the medication that was causing babies to be born deformed in Germany after the war, etc. Right? Yeah. Just if you don't trust the corporations, you're a Nazi. You're a socialist or a communist, etc. So they exploited all this stuff from the war, all these fears and anxieties and associations, so that this went largely unresisted. The drug and sex revolution. And every decade since, there has been less resistance to the moral decline. The socially engineered moral decline of the United States. If this was not the case, the marijuana and pornography would not be 10% of the income of the United States economy. Sorry, not the income. 10% of the United States economy. It's very telling how immoral that is, that those two industries are very interconnected with human trafficking and other industries like fentanyl, meth, etc., and are like Miracle-Gro for each other.